Kia ora, this is Liz. Welcome to Dame's Blaze. If you haven't watched the intro video yet, can I suggest you go do that now so you know what we're up to? Otherwise, grab your Bible and we'll dig on in. We are looking today at John chapter 5 verses 16 to 18 and I'll read them to you now. For this reason the Jews persecuted Jesus and sought to kill him because he had done these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, My Father has been working until now and I have been working. Therefore the Jews sought all the more to kill him, because he not only broke the Sabbath but also said that God was his Father, making himself equal with God. For this reason, well, what reason would that be? Well, because Jesus was the one who healed the man, which the Jews didn't really care about, and also told him to pick up his bed and carry it on the Sabbath. Shocking! For this reason, then, the Jews started to persecute Jesus. To persecute, in the original Greek language, means to aggressively pursue or chase or put to flight. It therefore means to persecute by implication. It can be a positive or a negative verb. You can go, I can earnestly pursue the things of God. That would be the positive side. Or on the negative, I will hunt you down and pursue and kill you. Right? That would be negative. Absolutely. In Jesus' case, of course, it's negative. There have obviously been some rumblings amongst the Sanhedrin about Jesus. About halfway through his ministry years, and he's been keeping things on the down low while at the same time stirring some controversy. He's already cleared the temple, spoken to the Samaritans, including a woman, healed a demoniac in the synagogue on the Sabbath, and even touched a leper to heal him. The Jews sent Nicodemus to have an interview with him, and he came back none the wiser, or possibly even more confused. The pot's been simmering in the background for over a year, and it's coming to a boiling point. The persecution proper starts here, with this healing, because breaking the Sabbath is a stonable offence, once taken very, very seriously. Let's turn to Numbers 15, and we'll show you just how seriously they used to take this. This is Numbers 15, 32 to 36. Now while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. And those who found him gathering sticks brought him to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation. They put him under guard, because it had not been explained what should be done to him. Then the Lord said to Moses, The man must surely be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp. So, as the Lord commanded Moses, all the congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him with stones. And he died. To us, this looks extremely harsh, but consider that this was when they were just starting out, and it was done more to show the Hebrews that God was serious about this than to show them how picky they had to be. But why was God so serious about the Sabbath? The Sabbath was a day of rest, sure, but it was also a day to prove you trusted God. When they collected manna, they were told to collect a double portion the day before the Sabbath. They had to trust God for a couple of things. One, that there would be enough to gather double, and two, more importantly, that it wouldn't rot overnight, because usually it did. So it was a test, the Sabbath, and the guy collecting sticks failed that test. But it wasn't just like getting an F on a paper. It was serious, because it indicated his lack of forethought and showed what he really thought about God. He failed to plan for the Sabbath by collecting enough the previous day. Therefore, he presumed on God's mercy when he should have been taking God's commandments seriously. But did Jesus actually break the Sabbath? The things that they were commanded to rest from were jobs that were about looking after number one. The guy who was stoned in Exodus wasn't gathering sticks for anyone else. He was providing for himself. When Jesus healed on the Sabbath, was he providing for himself or others? Was he trusting in God or showing a lack of trust? It seems to me that everything Jesus did on the Sabbath was about showing his faith in God through the healing of others. None of it broke the essence of the Sabbath. All he really did was show up the extra rules and regulations that the Jews had placed upon the Sabbath, and showed that they were more about trusting to man's ideas than trusting in God, like they were ticking boxes. There is one theory in Judaism, that if every Jew keeps the Sabbath perfectly for 2 Sabbaths in a row, the Messiah will come. Obviously, they haven't managed to do that yet. They still take this stuff extremely seriously, and you can see why. If they actually believe this particular one, well, you wouldn't want to be the one who's preventing the Messiah coming, now would you? As I said, they put more trust in themselves and their rules than in God and his mercy. So Jesus has in their eyes committed a sin worthy of stoning. Problem was, they couldn't actually legally stone him under Roman rule. Maybe if he hadn't already had a large following, they could have got away with it, as they do with Stephen. But with all the interest that Jesus had garnered, the likelihood of them getting into trouble with Rome was actually quite high. They couldn't kill him, or at least not on their own. They've got a year and a bit to work out how they can kill him without getting on Rome's bad side. Meanwhile, they persecute him, which doesn't actually mean what you think it means. You think it means they set up some kind of smear campaign, but actually what it means is that they sought the means to kill him. Or so my Bible says, but I am reliably informed that this phrase, sought to kill him, is not actually in the bulk of the original manuscripts, at least not here in verse 16. Most of the translations do not include it, so we won't examine this statement here. It shows up again in verse 18, so we'll examine it when we get there. Then Jesus answered. Answered who exactly? We weren't told that the Jews, upon hearing the lame man's claim, went to seek Jesus, but what follows has the feel of a conversation, so we kind of have to assume that that is what happened. They go to find him and ask him what he's doing, making this man carry his bed on the Sabbath. Indeed, what is he doing healing someone on the Sabbath? The word answered always throws me, because to us, if we're answering, there must have been an initial question. But in older times, to answer simply meant to take up the conversation. A conversation which was most likely begun by the Jews is now being entered into by Jesus, who, rather quickly, takes the conversation over and turns it into a teachable moment, as is his wont. Right out of the gate, Jesus puts their backs up. My Father. Wait, what did he say? Did he say Pater meu? My Father? But that's blasphemy. You don't get how weird this is, because you're used to hearing this phrase from Jesus' lips, and you've accepted that he is indeed the Son of God. But to those Jews, those two words really lit a fire under their feet. The Jews, indeed the Israelites, did refer to God as Father. Here's a couple of scriptures just to back that one up, right? This is from Deuteronomy, and it's part of Moses' song just before he heads up the mountain to die. So Deuteronomy 32:6. Do you thus deal with the Lord, O foolish and unwise people? Is he not your Father who brought you? Has he not made you and established you? And just in case you think it was only in Moses' day and that God didn't agree with the title, here's a bit from Malachi, right? So this is Malachi 1:6. A son honours his father and a servant his master. If then I am the Father, that's God speaking, where is my honour? And if I am master, where is my reverence? Not uncommon then for the Jews to be referring to God as Father, but they saw that in creative terms, not personal terms. So let me explain. God to them is the Father in the sense that he has begotten us through creation of Adam. So it's a creative idea. It's not the word Father that bugs them really. It's the very small word my, or mu, if you want to be Greek about it. It's a personal pronoun. It makes God personally Jesus' Father. And that they cannot let go by. By making God his own personal Father, Jesus is speaking what was to the Jews blasphemy, because it was making himself equal with God, especially as he uses this relationship to prove his right to work. And I use that term loosely, on the Sabbath. Still, he does allow for the word with the rest of his defense. So he says, my Father has been working until now, and I have been working. So the same Greek word is used for both the appearances of working, the same tense as well. So they're both in the present tense, which not only indicates that Jesus is God, but also that he is eternal. He's been around as long as God, which is forever, just saying. The only difference in the statement between God's work and Jesus' work is that God's is in the third person and Jesus is in the first. He's not just made himself equal with God, but God himself, which of course we can get and understand, but they could not. Do you see why they wanted him dead? But in what way has God been working? Aren't we told that he rested on the seventh day? Isn't that where the whole concept of Sabbath rest comes from? Sure it does. Of course it does. But the rest that God took on the seventh day wasn't from all work. It was a rest from creative work. This is what Genesis 2:3 says. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work which God had created and made. Right? He rested from creating. Everything that we see around us was created in kind in the beginning, but that didn't mean God literally hasn't done anything since then. We know this because otherwise scriptures like, he will not allow your foot to be moved, he who keeps you will not slumber, behold, he who keeps Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. Or, unless the Lord builds the house, they labour in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. If God is still resting, these two and others like them make very little sense. God is vigilant over the earth that he created and the people he populated it with. He is neither uncaring nor neglectful, as modern skeptics might accuse him of being. Rather, he is an ever-present force, keeping the earth spinning on her axis and making sure those plans that he set in place from time immemorial come to pass. Consider this in the light of the days of Jesus. Did those in power work? Did the gods of Greece work all the time? Or Rome, for that matter? Could we say of Zeus that he never slept nor slumbered? Or even, got drunk and behaved himself poorly? Nope. Rich men rested, poor men worked. Gods of man's design rested, partied, revelled even. Not so the God of the Hebrews. He's a vigilant God, a God who will party when all his plans have come to pass. That doesn't mean he's a God without joy. There are a number of psalms that speak of him laughing. True, he's laughing at his enemies, but he's still laughing. Our God is a working God, not a layabout, get drunk, stupid God. He's working, and Jesus likewise, as his son, is working. The Sabbath does not negate his need to be working, just as the Father works on the Sabbath as he does on every other day of the week. The Jews have accused him of breaking the law, and his defense is to speak of his unity with God. They are in perfect communication with one another. There is nothing that the Son does or will do that isn't a direct result of the relationship between them, a relationship that we only understand a little bit. We get love between mother and child or father and child, and we can look at the relationship between father and son in that light, but there is so much more going on here in the spiritual realm than we can ever hope to comprehend. How are they separate entities and yet the same? How is there love between them and yet they are one? The mystery of the Trinity is a hard knot to untangle, and perhaps we should stop trying. There are some mysteries that are beyond our ken, and that is as it should be, for we are mere mortals. We cannot hope to understand God in every single capacity. It would, I suspect, literally blow our minds. What we can understand, though, is the response of the Jews. Therefore, the Jews sought all the more to kill him. The Jews could not afford to take Jesus on head-to-head, because he had a large following, and large followings are a threat to anyone in power, and so they sought all the more to kill him. Now, that doesn't mean they were chasing after him with a spear trying to kill him, but rather they were seeking ways to have him killed. Now, we've met the Greek word for seek before. It means to seek by inquiring, to investigate in order to reach a binding resolution, to get to the bottom of a matter. So what they're telling you is that from this point, they start working out a plan of attack. And why are they so desperate to see him dead? Well, because he broke the Sabbath. But also, he said that God was his father. They were offended before with his casual use of the Sabbath as they saw it. Now they are incensed. He has called the Lord his own personal father, and that cannot go unpunished. The word used in verse 18 that is translated his is idios. It's where the word idiosyncrasy comes from. Yes, not the word idiot. I know what you were thinking. It was a word used originally in English as a medical term, meaning physical constitution of an individual. We would think of it as someone's peculiarities, their habits, whims, fads that are all specific to an individual person. In the Old Greek, idios meant one's own or belonging to one or private or personal. So Jesus is taking God from being a collective deity that was for all of Israel to one specific to himself. I thought we would do well to consider. Not that we form him in our image, please don't do that, but rather we consider him to be a personal God as well as a collective God, a God who cares about us personally, not just as a collective group. He cares about you as an individual human person, not just as a member of the body of Christ. Jesus has every right to claim this relationship, but to the Jews, by doing so, he has made himself equal with God. which makes sense to us, right? Equal is isos, meaning equivalent or even identical. It's actually the root of our word isosceles, which is a triangle with two equal sides. Shame it's not the basis for the equilateral triangle. Then we'd have all three aspects of God in equal length and importance. But an isosceles does help us somewhat to see how interconnected the Father and the Son are. They are equal in strength, in desire, and will. There is nothing the Father does that the Son cannot do. We will get into this more next week as we explore Jesus' teaching on this subject, but I do want you to go away this week with this idea that they are equal. The Son is no less important, no less a personage than the Father. They are equal, and they are one. If this was Jesus' defense from a human perspective, it's a poor one. Before he spoke, they were mad enough. His words, far from being a denial of the charges they laid against him, actually seem to agree with them, and what's more, he gives them more fuel for their fire, and they are now baying for his blood. As I said, legally, stoning is something that they actually can't do. They can't just up and kill him. They no longer have that right thanks to being vassals of Rome. They'll have to think of some other way, though, because they can't have this rogue preacher going around making himself equal with God. Imagine how frustrated they must have felt at this juncture. Jesus has committed in their eyes a solid blasphemy. In years past, they would have grabbed him, dragged him out of Jerusalem, gathering a mob as they went and stoned him to death in the valley. How frustrating that they can't do this. Their hands must have been twitching just to pick up a rock. But this shows God's plan out working to perfection. If Israel had not been a vassal of Rome at this point, Jesus would never have been crucified. He would most likely have been stoned to death. And all those prophecies about his hands and feet being pierced, the lots being thrown for his clothing, him being lifted up like the bronze snake of Moses, all of that would have fallen away were it not for God's perfect timing. Can you hear the Jews getting louder and louder in their condemnation of Jesus? Can you hear their religious hearts beating as if they've discovered a demon in their midst? How did they manage to keep their hands off him at this point and over the next year and a bit? Well, they managed it because God willed it. They were stuck between the laws of Rome and the popularity that Jesus had amongst the normal people. People in power appear to care nothing for normal people. But there's one thing that keeps them up at night. It's the one thought that all dictators fear: uprising. If the normal people get tired of being trampled on, if they hear the truth and the truth sets them free, if they turn and see how downtrodden they really are, then those at the top will fall. What they fear the most is the unity of the masses. This conversation is what triggers their pursuit of a way to have him killed. But they need to be cunning in how they go about it. They need a way to entrap him into a statement that they can use to convince the Roman governor that he is worthy of a Roman death. But consider his supposed sins in the light of theirs. Jesus has gone into the temple and found it to be a den of thieves. The Jews, and can I just remark that's not the whole population of the Jews, but the Pharisees that are against Jesus, those guys were stealing from their own people. They were manipulating them, using them, fleecing them of their own hard-earned money to line their own pockets. They didn't even care that the temple was being desecrated, and yet they dared to accuse him of breaking the Sabbath. Their disregard for the sanctity of the temple was just as heinous a crime, if not more so. So that would be the Sadducees who were doing all that to the temple, not the Pharisees. From here, Jesus goes on to explain what the work is that he has been doing and how it relates to his relationship with his Father. But what can we learn from this? We cannot hide the truth. Even if it endangers us, even if we know it will upset or enrage the listener, even if we know it might make things worse. When the truth needs to come out, it should come out. Just remember to speak the truth in love. We don't need to hit people over the head with the truth. It's not meant to be a blunt instrument. There are times for bluntness, but in my experience, they are few and far between. Better to err on the side of a loving rebuke than assume you need to set people straight as bluntly as possible. And also remember that God is still working, still keeping the world spinning, still ultimately in charge. It's not the easiest time to be alive. The world is getting crazier day by day, but what gives me courage and hope and keeps a smile on my face is to remember that God is still working. He is still in charge, and his plans will come to fruition, all of them. And so with that last lovely thought, I leave you this week. I pray blessings upon you and your household, and we will see you again next week. Ka kite.